building. But what happened was in the 1920s, or was it 1930s, the Library of Congress had a big project that they came in and they documented all these historical homes. And so if you go out to the Library of Congress, and I reference it here, they have a full description about the building itself, a lot of really good information about the background of the building, and they talk a little bit about the the area and so forth, Hempstead County and so forth. Yeah, it's quite interesting. I pulled it on the site, but I also have links to it. But it talks about Blevins, Fulton, Washington, and so forth. But that's what some of the information is here. But what I was going to say is one of the other pieces of research that I did is, of course, now we have satellite maps, right? Google Maps have satellite maps. Well, in the 40s, there was no such thing as a satellite map, but I did find that they did a lot of aerial maps in the late 1940s. But I found this aerial map in 1949 where I think I found the location of the old Blevins Tavern itself before they tore it down in the mid-50s. That corresponds with the photo that I showed earlier of if they took it this way, showing the back of the school here. So that's where I think that more than likely the Hugh Blevins house was in that location. And they changed the roads up a lot during that time and so forth. But this is just talking a little bit about the direction of the photo back when they took that was really sort of taken this way. You sort of see that in the background. So, but just the final thing is on this one is that they changed the roads a lot from where they are today to where they were in 1949. The road used to go sort of around to the backside. It actually goes right through the middle of what we call the junior high school here, and then here's the gymnasium, or basketball gymnasium. So the road back in 1949, which is here, this 49 photo, and then this is, I guess, 2020 or whatever. So, but that's where we think the location is. We did have an archaeologist come out from University of Arkansas. He's actually stationed down at SAU. He did some scanning. He didn't find anything, but he still thinks it's probably in that area. Thinks probably when they were building the gym that they disrupted the ground so much. And it's a wood building anyway, and he didn't really find anything, but it's just something to be aware of. Does that make sense, or what?
Do you know who took all the wood?
No, I don't. Yeah. Has anybody ever heard rumors about it, or anything like that? Yeah. So, yeah, it's sort of a sad thing that it's sad it was torn down, but nobody knows, and so, but all right, and so that was. There's other area homes around the area, and so there's a section on that. I won't talk about that. Mr. Taylor here helped me a lot with this section, and basically this is the downtown Blevins area that you see here that we saw the sort of the side view of area earlier. It was sort of pointing this way was the view that we saw a little bit earlier, but this is that aerial view from 1949, and so Mr. Taylor helped me quite a bit with this to go through and identify all the different just a little bit further, all the different buildings that were there and what those were, what the name of the buildings were, and so forth. So for example, over here, this is the west side, labeled W, east side, labeled east. This is the old M.L. Nelson store at the top, Bank of Blevins, a number of different stores through here that you can see labeled there. And then labeled on this side as well. If anybody ever takes a look at it, sees any kind of corrections or things that need to be tweaked, I'll be more than happy to do that. But it's just sort of a way. This is that view that you see on the cover, using that same numbering scheme of what buildings were where, right? So you see on the capture. Yeah. So
what is that right above the bank building?
So
like a steeple or something?
Actually, let me look here. I'm going to zoom in, and that's a great question. Does anybody, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, right, well, is this somewhere?
Yeah, just press the red. Is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah. it's on the side.
Where-
Yeah, this one. Right. There you go.
Oops. That's right. Yeah, but basically you're saying it's right here. Peggy, you worked there at the bank for a long time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what it could be.
On the other side of the bank.
Yeah.
It's not on the bank, it's not on top of the bank.
Could that have been, you know, let's look at the next picture, because I have a few detailed pictures of each one of these. So this is sort of a summary. I've got detailed pictures of a lot of these. So let's look. I'm going to look it down at M.L. Nelson's. You can go through each one of these. The old post office, the cotton gin. The cotton gin's still there, and is actually in. Probably looks similar to what that is today. Oh, this is another one.
Somebody has this side.
This is a older picture that Miss Willis took. That okay. So you know that's interesting. This building is M.L. Nelson's store. It was there at that time, I believe, wasn't it, Mr. Taylor? Could it have been this section right here that we saw? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But that's a great question. You can sort of see it poking up there. So, but that's a M.L. Nelson store. But each one of these, and this is M.L. Nelson himself, he was sort of the local retailer, but I think he sold everything. But the just the one thing on Mr. Nelson, oh, and this is another picture from a side perspective. And that sort of shows what you were seeing
Yeah.
is the building. So it could have been this section right here, maybe poking out. Yeah. So,
It's the bank.
but that's another picture of that. There's a bank, the bank of Blevins, and so a lot of good information. Just about this section is all about the different stores, and I'm sure that there's maybe a few other stores that were not captured here, but when you take a look at it, you can sort of see how it was, you know, sort of the theme of to do a little bit more digging or whatever. So, but Mr. Nelson, and we'll talk about that just in a little bit. There's two things there. One is, and you're welcome to look at it. About 2 weeks ago, there's a citizen or a person that lives in the Blevins area. He goes, "Hey, I have these journals that I have, and I don't want them." But basically, there are 3 journals, logs from M.L. Nelson. One from '44, one from I think a couple from the '50s, whatever. But it's like a ledger. It's what everybody bought, you know, throughout the year. And I have one over there. My grandfather, Montgomery, also had a store 6 miles out in the Sweet Home community. A small community store for 30 years, and I have one of his journals over there as well. So I just find that interesting. I haven't gone through them all in detail, but there's a lot of common names for those of us from the Blevins area that we look through and I remember my dad talking about this name, or I remember this name. I mean, Sanford Bonds, you know, I know is in there, and there's just a lot of common names that are in there. It's got the Blevins School in there. And one topic, it talked about, you know, back when the schools were segregated, the Blevins schools for for blacks and African Americans was called the Blevins Training School. And so there's a whole segment in the book, one's for Blevins schools and one's for Blevins Training School. So it's quite interesting. But that was M.L. Nelson. He was sort of a center pin. The other element, just to mention as well, which you'll see in the front here, is this, and this was a peddling truck. And probably most everyone is familiar with that concept, but I like to say that was Amazon Amazon delivery of the 30s and 40s. Because in reality is that from everything that I've heard, you pretty much anything you need, if the peddler came by, the guy at the peddling truck, if he came around your area, which was usually about once a week, maybe twice a week, I don't know for sure, but you needed to know what you wanted, and you could either A, buy it, or you could bargain with that individual. But M.L. Nelson had a set of peddling trucks that he would send out. And I'm very familiar with this because my grandfather was one of those drivers. And he, you know, we have photos of my grandfather driving one of those trucks. But also the other person that is Teresa Bonds. I've talked to her several times. Her name is Teresa Newsom. But she lived in the area, and she remembers and tells stories of the peddling trucks, you know, coming by. And they would have canned goods. They would have, you know, they would have maybe a chicken coop on top. They would have, you know, whatever. And the one other thing to mention real quick, I remember our mom, my mom's mom would, she would leave the house, and she lived like less than maybe a mile from the school. She would have to walk to school. And if she ever needed like a pencil and paper or whatever, her mom would give her an egg. My grandmother would give her an egg, go to M.L. Nelson's store and give Mr. Nelson an egg, and he would give a little pad of paper and, you know, pencil for the day or whatever. So it was a lot of bargaining and stuff like that. But I just wanted to sort of highlight that because I've heard a lot of stories of M.L. Nelson and, you know, his, the store and so forth. So hopefully that makes sense. I just thought that the town, from a places and events, sort of stores and business. But just to hit on the peddling trucks just real quickly, there's a lot of different drivers, you know, that were around. Some of these came, and on all these I was very careful to give, like Miss Willis had this one. I think her grandfather drove a peddling truck, and that was one. This is the one in front of the store. This is a story about John Moses Meyer's father drove a peddling truck. So just a lot of stories about that. So this is just a whole section on the peddling trucks. This is my grandfather, Montgomery. He actually had a store, but before he had a store, he drove a peddling truck for Mr. Nelson. But just you can sort of see the level of type of information. The doors closed on the sides, but they had everything. They had paper. They had, you know, just probably anything you might need. And it's like, how do you keep all that? But so I don't know if you remember or not, but I never. I know you don't remember driving the truck, but I think it's interesting for him because he always wore a top hat and a tie, and it was not an air-conditioned truck. He was out, you know, and I'm sure all of them did the similar type thing. So, but this one's that is, but you can see here the lady here's got a can of Campbell soup, you know, so they had even Campbell soup. So, but this was just how life was, you know, back in the 30s. In the 40s, so yeah, you know. But this was, yeah. So this, Debbie's, this is her dad right here. Yeah, her dad right here, Joe Brick. So, and again, my granddad here is Joe Dow. So, but just a lot of, just to give you a perspective, you know, sort of how life was from that perspective. So there's a lot more detail on each one of these topics. And then just a few other things. Area maps, it's really, what I did here was just try to get a perspective for individuals looking at it from a history perspective, understanding, and I think most everybody understands, you know, Hempstead County is a pretty big county now. It used to be huge. You know, Hempstead County used to be a lot bigger, and over time it just whittled down, and you know, politics or whatever took chunks out to create like Nevada County and so forth. But the thing is, like, this is an old map. I think before Nevada County was here, so you see Hempstead County was bigger than it is even today. And but this is a whole section just on area maps. And and then this, just as a perspective, and I'm sort of calling this out so on all of these for you to take a look at later. I think this is something that's very interesting. This is what they call a soil survey map of the Hempstead County area, actually from either 16 or 1920. And it's amazing to the level of detail that they went to on this. It's in the 1960s. But actually, what I did, I put a section just for the Blevins area, but I'm gonna see if I can go here. But you can click on a link, and we'll see if, yeah. So now you're like, oh, well, what is that really telling me? But you can take this, oh, actually on this one, you actually have to use this plus sign right here. But you can actually drill in, and you can see the soil survey map from that time frame, from the 1916, and like here, like here's Washington, right? And you can see what they did. They were showing what kind of soil was in the area, but what they did, which is real nice, they located all the dots are homes, and all the crosses are churches, right? So I think this is about the most you can zoom in here, but this is online. It's open. It's free to the public. You know, whatever. So I just put a link to it, or whatever. But I think I also put one to Nevada County as well. So but this is Hempstead County, and but you can see like where were the roads, what was life sort of like in 1960, right? And so like if we go into the area in Blevins over here, and you zoom in, you can see all the details around the Blevins area, like sort of how the streets were during the time. You know, for those of us who live out in as a side note, where the Marlboro community was and where the Marlboro church is sort of two different areas. So just sort of a side note. But a lot of the roads back then were either gravel, they weren't like nice and paved. So there was a lot of start and stops, back in the day. But you can go here and get a perspective of sort of how things were in 1916, in the, not only the Blevins area, but all over Hempstead County. All right. And then, let's see, how are we looking on time? Just a few other things in here. I try to hit on some of the community topics. So I was just thinking, Mr. Lowe, are you in the McCaskill area, right? So one of the things that I'm just going to call a couple things out here. Again, the Redland McCaskill area, I would say there's a Facebook page that Mr. Will Rogers had put together. He's done a great job. But what I was able to do, I think it was Keith Brooks brought to my brother David this book about the Redland Township about a month ago. And so Phyllis Warren Brooks, I don't know if you know Phyllis Warren Brooks, who is from the McCaskill area. She lives actually in Florida now, and I've corresponded with her in the past, and she had actually worked to update this book, and I said, hey, do you have any problem with me putting this online? She said, no, that's absolutely fine. She goes, even better yet, I have a PDF version of that, and she sent it to me, and I have some tool that will actually put it in what we call a flipbook type of a format. And so you can actually go here if you're interested in finding out sort of information about the Redland area. And basically it's just a whole book on the history of that, the Redland and McCaskill area. It was originally published in 1920s, and she updated it in, I think, about 2015 with just, some, all about the agriculture, all about the history of the area and so forth. This has, and again, can't see quite as well there, but you can zoom in like McCaskill package, just a lot of history on, that particular area, cotton picking and the industries and so forth. So just wanted to point that out. That's something you can click to and go into the details on that. So that's one, and for that particular community, CMTY community, these are sort of outside communities. For Sweet Home, the community that a lot of us grew up in, this is people call it about the Harris Curve. This is Harris Grocery, which was near the Harris Curve. This is across the street from my grandfather's place, and this is my granddad's store back in the day, and that's my dad. Actually, when they were building the store back in the 40s, he was a World War II vet. And then this is sort of the cash register, sort of some historical type things that were there. It's an article my sister Sue wrote a few years ago, a great article about front porch memories, around that area. and so forth. But this is the Sweet Home Community Club, and so forth. So just, like I said, not hitting on all of it, but just sort of giving a perspective. There used to be a school in the Sweet Home community. We always hear about school consolidation, in the last, 10, 15 years. Well, guess what? It's happened, it was happening 100 years ago. Sweet Home got incorporated into Blevins at some point. But at one point, Sweet Home had its own school. And this is, this is a class out of the Sweet Home. This is actually my dad's right there in the very middle. My father right here. So he went to the Sweet Home school years ago. So just, but the other thing is, and I haven't had put this in a flip book, but back in the 50s, there was a Sweet Home group that put together a book, and we actually still have this book on the Sweet Home community, talking about, what area was the Sweet Home community. It sort of defined it. Here's Blevins, it's sort of outside going toward Prescott. And, but this information is out there. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but just trying to collect all this information and old photos from the Sweet Home community and so forth. So this was, one of the key communities where I grew up in. So, any questions? I don't want to just keep talking, but just. And then I have a lot more of this, but I found Miss Willis had a lot of, I call them old newspaper clippings. I never remember Blevins having a newspaper, but there was a newspaper in the early 1900s, and this is a sort of some of the clippings that she had from that old paper, and so it's just.
Was it just clipping she had?
I'm sorry?
Just clipping she had?
Well, this is all she had. Some of this was a little bit scattered out, and I sort of said, okay, let's focus on Blevins newspaper. Now, this being, to your point, this was actually the Blevins News. So this is a paper created in the Blevins. It looks like in the Blevins area. The other thing that I have is I call it just old newspaper clippings. These were not necessarily from the Blevins newspaper, but were articles from papers that were talking about things in that area. So this wasn't necessarily from the Blevins area itself, but these were just a lot of articles from Blevins, McCaskill, and so forth that I was able to find. And then we have several old scrapbooks just talking about things that happened around the area. And so this is a whole section there. There's a lot more content that I'll be adding to this section because I just have a lot more old articles I need to get scanned in and added to this. A lot of this, some of this rings a bell, hearing stories that my dad mentioned or, things that happened in the past. But these were, Bell's Chapel is a different, is a church in that area. So, there's a whole area on churches and cemeteries, so you can take a look at that. The 1921 tornado was a huge tornado, just devastated the community back in the early 1920s. So this is sort of a write-up about that. I think, if I'm correct, Mr. Taylor, I think the Macedonian church was maybe destroyed or demolished at that time. So one of the main churches in the Wallaceburg area was destroyed during that time. That was rebuilt, after that. But just a lot of families, 19 lives lost and so forth in that area. But just a couple other topics. One is, we talked about earlier the railroad. And so there's a whole section on the Prescott Northwest Railroad. And that was, as Mr. Taylor said, was probably one of the main reasons the community shifted from Wallaceburg over to the Blevins area, because the path just took it, through that area. So what's interesting from that perspective on my part is that there were, along the way, there were a lot of, they call them watermelon sheds or cantaloupe sheds or packing sheds that all along the way from the Prescott and Northwest Railroad all the way up. I don't think it went exactly to Murfreesboro, but I'm sorry. Island. Okay, Island. peaches. Peaches were huge, I remember as a kid, Mom coming home with a big bushel of peaches, from that area. But all along the way, there were packing stations for cantaloupes, for cucumbers, for whatever. But that was just a thriving business, back in the day. Several individuals, after I even posted this, have sent me additional photos of trains and pictures of packing sheds and so forth. And I note those on these as I add them in. So it's real easy, the way the site works. If I need to add photos, people send photos and so forth. So I add them in, whenever I get those. So there, here's a packing shed. Mr. Roy Rogers had provided that one. I think this was in the McCaskill area and so forth. So so that was just a lot of information here around the road itself. And then the last couple things is just to mention here on the, I'm still working on World War I and II information, but the Southwest Proving Ground, I think, many of us have heard stories of that and so forth, but some of the research that I had completed here, one thing I had done is put here sort of the location of Blevins to where the border of the Southwest Proving Ground was. I think most everybody knows that Southwest Proving Ground, and my son and I, when we came in from Hope, we actually drove right in front of the airport, we jig-jagged over, and I just showed him what's called the West Patrol Road, right? They had the East Patrol Road and the West Patrol Road, and so we just drove the West Patrol Road until we got here to Washington. The East Patrol Road, it ran, up here, not too far from the Blevins area. But I thought this was important because so many people in the Hempstead County area were impacted by the Southwest Proving Grounds, either from being moved from out, having to be moved out when they built the proving grounds to working there, during that time frame. So what this section does is just talk about the Southwest Proving Ground. I think it was Phyllis Miss Brooks sent this, and this was an article that I did not have originally, but it was just talking about all the people that were impacted and required to move. And when they were asked to move, it wasn't like, oh, you have a year to move. It was pretty fast. I don't know how quick it was, but during the early 40s, when they said this will be the proving grounds, the Southwest Proving Grounds, there were a lot of cemeteries moved, there were a lot of people displaced and so forth. And so this is a complete article about those people that were displaced and how quickly had to be displaced and so forth. It shows somebody having their home moved, or they were moving their own house. I read a little bit about this. This guy, the family here, they actually went in, got a saw and cut their house in half and moved the two halves, wherever they moved it to. I don't know the specific detail, but that's what they did. And it wasn't like I said, it wasn't like, oh, well, you can move a year from now. It's like, no, you need to be out 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. So, and others may know more about the area than I do, but this is an area to collect any kind of history around the Southwest Proving Ground. I know the reason I put this here, or really came to thought, is the lady in the very middle here is my aunt. So, Faye Duke. So, my mom was a Mauser, and Laurie Mauser. This was her oldest sister, Faye. So, Faye Mauser at the time. And before my mom passed, we were driving through the back roads of around the area where she grew up, and she showed specifically, she said, see right there, we moved here, and it was, of course, a clear-cut area at the time, but our house was right here, and we moved here because Faye, her sister, had gotten a job at the Southwest Proving Grounds, and there was a bus. Basically what they did is they had a bus that would come by and pick up workers and take them to work. And so they had moved to this particular area to allow her to more easily catch the bus to be able to go to the Southwest Proving Grounds. But that was her in the middle. I don't know exactly what her job was, but I'd gotten this picture from her years back. I don't know who this lady was, but these were some personal pictures that we had. I just took some of these pictures of the airport and some of the displays. It's a really nice display if you ever go to the airport for the Southwest Proving Ground. This is one of the, this is a World War II airport, like Watchtower or whatever. All this was, from the World War II era, when that was going on. So these are just some photos from that. This is actually, if you have a chance to go in, I'd really encourage it. It's a small display, but it's got some real interesting information about the Southwest Proving Ground, some of the timing and so forth around that. The location of it, the East Patrol Road, which like my son and I just drove up, was around this area. So West Patrol Road, East Patrol Road, and then I'm pretty sure, and somebody might correct me, but that north straight line there is the McCaskill or Nashville Road, around Belton, right there. So it went all the way to that northern road. And then down here, that's further toward Hope, where this is. So that was a long, area there where the Southwest Proving Trail grounds were, and tested munitions and so forth. I've been, sort of the thing I've been wanting to take a picture of is one of the old bunkers. I don't know if anybody knows where one of the old bunkers are, but I'd be interested to take a picture of that. But someone has mentioned who to try to contact to be able to find an old bunker, but they would have observation bunkers. So, they would be concrete bunkers, and they would be out watching, and as they would explode munitions or whatever. So, but yeah, I thought that was funny. But the last thing I'll mention here, if you go to this section of the site, I actually found online and got permission from the University of Central Arkansas. Somebody, as part of the UCA Historical Society, back in the early, I think it was 80s or 90s, they did a series of interviews of individuals that worked at the Southwest Proving Grounds. And I think it was primarily, there was females that they interviewed or ladies that they interviewed. And the jobs were various, whatever. But they gave me not the right, but they said, hey, you can publish these. There's actually an audio capture somewhere. But what these are all of the interviews that they did of what individual jobs were during that time. So like in this case, this just shows the interviewee, the interviewer, the date of the interview, what that particular person's job was. She was a typist for the Proving Grounds. She worked on the firing line and so forth. So, it's something that might be of interest to you at some point, just to read those, to say, okay, what was life like? What was it like to be working at the Southwest Proving Grounds? What were the jobs like and so forth? So again, that's in that section. So, but there's probably 15 interviews or something like that. And when you get into each interview, actually you can just scroll up within that interview itself and see the all the content of the interview itself. All right. And I think that's pretty much it for this section. I didn't hit all of them, but again, what I'm just trying to do is give a perspective of maybe where you can go to and look later. The school, there's quite a bit of content on the old school that was in the Blevins area, and some of the history around that. And so there's that. The one thing that took quite a bit of time is, this is on the Blevins training school. As I said, the African American, the blacks had their own school for a period of time, and I reached out to a lady that actually graduated there, Joyce, I believe is her name, but she gave me this information on that school. There's actually, I took these photos. This is about, I'm going to say about a mile and a half south of Blevins, but it's the historical site where the old training school was, and they have a monument and so forth. So I'm trying to gather some additional information about the school itself, but it is an important part of our history. I know that when I went to school, started in the 70s, we were fully integrated, so it never was a question. Sue, my sister Sue, I know, probably and others, well, Ricky, When you went to school, probably early on, it wasn't integrated, so there was integration later on. I don't think it was ever an issue in Blevins, at all, but that is a part of our history in Blevins, is that at one point, we were a segregated school, and there was a separate school, and this is some information about that separate school that, for the African Americans that were in the area. So, again, I can't really talk about it, I just try to, because I didn't look through it. But the other thing is, and I think maybe most of you have seen this, the other impetus of sort of putting this site together, when you go to my mom's house, again, she's passed, but when we go to her house, there's a set of yearbooks that are about from here to here. And they started in 61, in the early 60s when my sister was going to school, and then they sort of end when my brother and I finished going to Blevins in about 82, 83. And I said, what if this house burned? What if, it would be really sad to lose all this history. And so about the same time, or even before I took on the capturing Mrs. Willis' information, I have something called a book scanner, and I started scanning in all the old yearbooks. And so that's what you see here. That was probably the most time-consuming part. Not that it was hard. I have, like I said, it's something called a book scanner, and it's really easy to turn a page, and you can just have somebody tap your foot, and it takes a picture of both pages. It does get a little complicated because the pictures are always flat, so I had to get a piece of glass to sort of flatten it out each time. But on this, pretty much you can go to any year. In 61 was the first year that they did a yearbook, and you just click on it, and then you just pretty much can turn through it like it's, like you're flipping through a yearbook, like you're setting at your desk, whatever. If there's any of it that's small, you can always just sort of zoom in if you have a touch screen, or you can just, you can zoom in. There's a zoom feature on the bottom of this. But yeah, so it's sort of, it's just some software that will take a PDF. Once I capture everything in like photos, JPEGs, turn it into a PDF, and the PDF into what they call a flip book. So you can just sort of flip through it, just like you're flipping through a yearbook at your house or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's not the same as a paper book, but it's pretty much as close as you can get. Even have a sound effect. I don't know if you can hear the sound effect. But you can even a bit of a sound effect on it. And so, yeah, so that was that. So this, like I said, these are the yearbook covers. And I was mentioning what I've done. It's sort of a decision since I'm really trying to make this historical, I'm taking 20 years in the past, and I said if it's 20 years or further, I'll put it out here. But if it's newer, I'll just wait. So I actually have all the yearbooks through 2020 already scanned in, but pretty much every January I'll just add a year. So like in 2025, I'll add 2005. 2026, I'll add 2006. I've already got all the content. Probably should add probably a few more years already, but it's easy just to sort of access and into it. And I was going to do something here real quick. Sorry, this is on a sort of a side note. Talking to Mr. Lowe, and he said, "Do you remember me?" I go, "Yes, I remember Mr. Lowe." But I was trying to see here if I could find it just real quick, and it may not be in here, but these are all the. I was trying to see in the elementary school. I was in the 5th grade, freshman, whatever, and it may not be in here, but I'm sure there's one of our PE class. And if I can't find it now, Mr. Lowe, we'll look at it in a little bit. But probably not at elementary school. But that gives you a perspective. You can go back and sort of reminisce and look at. There we go, Pee Wee basketball. Look at that. There we go. And that was just. I don't see my. Oh, there.
Yeah, I see.
Look at that. So there's Mr. Lowe. What's that? Well, it's funny because there's me, right there. Yeah, there's my brother David, right? And But Mr. Lowe was like, "Do you remember me?" And I go, "Of course I remember you." He would make us do these exercises like where you work your arms and strengthen your shoulders, and I'll never forget that because it hurt so bad. but the other thing I'll say real quick for Mr. Lowe, I said one of the most fun things we used to do. I mean, he coached basketball, but he also for PE we actually played dodgeball, right? And we had a lot of fun playing dodgeball, back in the day. And those little red balls hurt hard when you got hit, but I remember that as well. So, but that gives you a perspective of what you can do on the site to be able to look at old yearbooks and so forth. So I think that's pretty much about it. I'll just go back to the PowerPoint real quick and mention that. So I would say some of the key contributors, of course, Miss Willis, Bob Taylor, Mr. Taylor helped quite a bit on a number of different things. But a lot of the photos that you see of the downtown Blevins area, he provided all those. Buddy of mine, Ricky Steed, classmate, provided a lot of information. Lloyd Rogers, he's out in the California area now, but he's done a lot of work, for the McCaskill area. Phyllis Brooks. I've actually talked to Mike Stevens several times, many others. I mean, all of you have helped in some way. Peggy, you've helped a lot. I didn't necessarily call everybody, my sister Sue. So a lot of individuals, but these are ones that have just really contributed some of the key content. And then some of the sources, I've mentioned the book called Certain Caddo Sites in Arkansas. I actually have it over there. There's a book called from Sam Wiggins called The Printer's Devil. It's an odd name, but it's got probably more information about the Blevins area than anything I've ever seen before. And then Southwest Archives, I've gone there and done some research. A lot of the content I have here is not necessarily from there. Miss Willis may have gotten some of that, I don't know for sure. And the numerous websites. And I know you can always trust websites, but I try to cross-reference as many of those as possible when I would find that. And then just a few final things on the tools and technology. Basically, I have 3 different kind of scanners. I have a regular bed scanner. I have a book scanner that I talked about earlier. You just flip a page and basically scan a book. And then I have it's actually a negative scanner, negative and slide scanner. And that's been great. I've been able to find old slides and negatives that we didn't have photos of. That's mainly from my family perspective, but I've also been able to find some historical things where you just put it in a negative scanner. And then from a tool and technology perspective also, you see that sort of flipbooks approach. That's just some software that I have. And then on the website itself, I just did that on Google Sites. We all use Google or whatever, most people do. But there's something called Google Sites, and it's a free site. I actually made that. I did have to buy the URL name. So when you say blevinsarhistory.com, I did buy that, but that was like $10 a year. So that's not a significant cost. This is more of a time effort, not necessarily a cost effort. I wanted to find something that was, sort of low cost, did not require like paying $100 a year or whatever. And and then the final thing, sort of open up to Q&A, questions, and so forth. I mean, hopefully this was somewhat of interest.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you have any concept of the hours you spend?
Well, I would say this. 2 years ago, fortunately, I was able to retire, so I did have a little extra time on my hand. But it was a lot of hours. If you look at, but that's okay. I mean, it's fun to sort of collect information. I mean, and most all of you have contributed, so thank you very much. I mean, and there's things that I haven't even included yet. I've talked to Ricky and his mom, Mrs. Paul, Maxie Paul, about the Arcadia area, trying to find some information about that, and y'all shared that, and I haven't put a lot of that here. So all of you have contributed your time as well. So I really